This episode of The Biggest Table is brought to you in part by Wild Goose Coffee. Since 2008, Wild Goose has sought to build better communities through coffee. And for our listeners, Wild Goose is offering a special promotion of 20% off a one-time order using the code TABLE at checkout. To learn more and to order coffee, please visit wildgoosecoffee.com. In this episode of The Biggest Table, I interview Dave Zahl, founder of Mockingbird Ministries and author of several books, including Seculosity and Low Anthropology. We delve into Dave's latest book, The Big Relief, The Urgency of Grace for a Worn-Out World, discussing why grace remains a vital topic. Dave explains the continuous need for grace in a world that is often performance-driven and how his experiences and personal struggles informed his writings. The conversation touches on various aspects of grace, including its role in personal relationships, parenting, and religious life. Additionally, we explore the concepts of rest, play, and the stress induced by modern life's acceleration. The conversation concludes by discussing the joy and grace found in food, meals, and hospitality, reflecting on how shared meals and culinary experiences can bring grace and connection. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Biggest Table. I am your host, Andrew Camp, and in this podcast, we explore the table, food, eating, and hospitality as an arena for experiencing God's love and our love for one another. And today, I'm joined by Dave Zahl. Dave is the founder and director of Mockingbird Ministries, editor-in-chief of the Mockingbird website, and co-host of both the Mockingcast and the Brothers Zahl podcasts. He and his wife, Kate, live in Charlottesville, Virginia, with their 3 sons, where he also serves on the staff of Christ Episcopal Church. Zahl is the author of Seculosity, How Career Parenting, Technology, Food, Politics, and Romance Became Our New Religion and What to Do About It, and Low Anthropology, The Unlikely Key to a Gracious View of Others and Yourself. His latest book, The Big Relief, The Urgency of Grace for a Worn-Out World, came out in April 2025 from Brazos Press. His writing has been featured in The Washington Post, Plow, Christianity Today, and The Guardian, among other venues. So thanks for joining me today, Dave. I'm excited about this conversation.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. Really glad to be here.
Yeah. So I'm going to start here. Why another book about grace? What made you think we need to talk about grace? When there are some already great books about grace. And so what do you feel needed new or reminded for readers about grace?
That's a wonderful question. And it is like a sort of a scary arena to jump into because there's so many of the books that have been formative for me about Christianity have been books about grace. And I'm thinking of Buechner or Philip Yancey or just there's a large, Anne Lamott's written about it. There's a large scope of people who've written well about grace. I think though it's almost like asking why another sermon.
Right.
That grace is not something. It's so restorative and healing and potent, but it's also so counterintuitive that one of the great privileges of being a person in form of sort of public ministry is trying to return myself as well as those who I'm speaking to this kind of otherworldly stream of life known as grace that we constantly sort of just magnetically almost pulled away from through our own our own wounds or our own the systems we live in or simply just distractibility. So I thought that it's also one of these words or concepts that it helps to have fresh points of reference and fresh stories. And just when I was researching this book, I was reading books about grace, and there's a lot of really good ones. But then then you'd stumble onto something that felt a little like, oh, that 15 years ago, or that felt like slightly different. It's not that God's grace has changed, but the ability to effectively communicate it, there's always little undulations, and there's spiritual conditions shift a little bit. And so I felt that I'd had some purchase in talking about grace over the years with Mockingbird, and I'd been asked to write a book about grace. That's another reason to write it.
Yeah.
They thought it was marketable. And so all of the above, but I mean, the ultimate reason that I could say is that I am a person who lives under the law
Hmm.
meaning I have very loud sort of inner critical faculties and a very much constantly I wouldn't call it scrupulosity of some kind, but I'm very, very aware of the ways in which I'm falling short, and
Yeah.
I need personally to come back to the well of grace. And so what better way to do that from sort of to operate out of my own personal need um, than to kind of write a book to myself almost.
No, I appreciate that. Like, because, um, like you said, yeah, grace, how we communicate grace can change over the years, and a lot has changed in, 15, 20 years, it feels like. Um, and at the same time, then we're, any of us who follow Jesus, like we constantly live with this burden or law or conscience that, is seeking to justify ourselves. And then even when I look around, like there seems to be like everybody wants grace, but it feels like it's harder to bestow grace um, amongst people, especially people we disagree with. And so it's just, um, yeah, like everybody wants grace, but nobody wants to be the first to give grace. It feels like,
Yeah, yeah, and I put myself in that
yeah,
that number. I love it when it's coming for me, but when it's aimed at someone I don't like or someone I really think needs to say sorry in these specific ways or make this kind of movement, then I really don't like it. So there's something that we resist about it, something I resist about grace that I find to be pretty close to the core of my heart. And so when you're talking about grace, you end up getting down deep and you kind of you scrape into the marrow of a person's life because you're dealing with their deepest grudges and their deepest fears and their whatever whatever guilt they carry. These are not things that people uh, they're not far from um, the viscera, So
no,
it can be exhausting to write even a short book about grace as I did, but I think it's worthwhile because most of the people I know who initially are drawn to Christianity, there's some they will talk about grace in some way that they couldn't believe there was some sort of second chance. There was some kind of
right.
love that transcended earning. That's deeply appealing to human beings of all eras, stripes, categories. Where we go with that is usually where we go wrong, or where
Yeah.
we get complicated, or things get obscured. But yeah, that's what I also look around. As I put in the subtitle, I look around at a world that is peer groups and friends and enemies. I don't like to think I have a lot of enemies, but I look around and I see a very, very exhausted, graceless age.
Yeah.
And that pains me.
No, and in Seculosity, you sort of talk about like this longing for enoughness, which I feel like taps into the heart and part of what grace is like, am I enough? Who am, will somebody see me as enough? And you talk about it as this deep longing that is slightly ironic because it's this longing we all share, but it's also the value or this longing that sometimes keeps us apart, because in our enoughness we look towards other things, for satisfaction or for belonging or for identity. And so then that is what pulls us into these silos or these camps, in which, we're stuck in this rut of having to perform constantly.
Yes, I think that the reason that book hit a nerve, if it hit a nerve, which I think it did a little bit, that's why, because people are so familiar with the dynamics of sort of, I never felt like I was enough in youth group, so I'm gonna,
Right.
but I do feel pretty good at my yoga studio, or I do feel pretty good. I feel like I'm a part of something. I'm accepted. I'm whole when I'm part of this, activist group or my political, peers, or simply my office job, however it may be. But what we find is that the performative ladder climbing instinct follows us into those, and into those silos. And of course, when you're dealing with any kind of money making, companies leverage our feelings of not enoughness to get our dollars, and it gets very complicated very quickly. But a reason I wrote that book is because I found myself in those silos. I wasn't like somehow I hadn't successfully negotiated around them. Even as a Christian, I was very much concerned with how busy I was, and I was very much concerned with the 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 the, the rate at which I was sort of progressing, or the way I was viewed online versus in person. There's so much there. So yeah, all my books have born out of personal need.
No, right. It seems that's the best writing is when we, can struggle with the ideas and, be reminded of what we need to be reminded of. And that's, doing a podcast has helped me sort of sort through ideas and where do I need to be reminded of, or where do I need to wrestle with? And, and it's been challenging, but enjoyable. My wife will always be like, so what are you going to take from one of those podcasts? Like, how is it not just an intellectual exercise, but an actual like transformative process for you? And so, it's not the same as writing, but I feel like there's some correlation of wrestling through ideas and who do I want to be as a person?
I'm sure as your work as a chef, that seems to that involves your hands, and that involves a different form of probably side of your brain, and all these things work together.
Yep.
It's hard. It's hard to separate them off, wall them off, even when we try to.
No, right. Yeah. And then you also talk about, you see that this world is this worn out, exhausted world. And, in later chapters, you bring in Hartmut Rosa, who's this great German sociologist who I've benefited from his work, from reading Andy Root, but also reading some of his books, which aren't easy reading by any stretch of the means. But like Hartmut, diagnoses these problems of acceleration, this idea that modernity has accelerated life for us, and that we also want control. We want to seek to control and manipulate everything so that, the world works out for us. And so like, how have you seen like acceleration and even this idea of control, push grace maybe to the fringes for people?
Well, gosh, I mean, you could talk about it in church circles if people are churchgoers, that the attempt to kind of keep up and to add more services, to be more and more available to folks, that you're always on, and that you don't just need an evening service on a Sunday as well as 3 morning services. You also need a midweek thing, and you're just kind of trying to be all things to all people. And in terms of roles, even in an ecclesial context, like there's an acceleration of what's expected of, say, a pastor, because part of those are like economic realities, but those become very, very points of exhaustion and burnout and weariness. And all of a sudden you're proclaiming grace perhaps, but you're doing it at a speed that completely undercuts what you're saying, because it looks like you're trying to perform, because you've also not only are you a fundraiser and a preacher and an administrator, you are also now a brand, and you have to produce content and all of these things. Those sorts of demands run a person ragged. But that happens in every other arena that I can tell. I was thinking today about, youth sports is one area that's on my mind. But Jason Gay was writing something in the Wall Street Journal this week about confessions of a mediocre youth sports parent, and he says, I don't know a single parent who doesn't feel like the system that's going on with youth sports in America. And if you have a child, it's not really. It's more sort of a middle class thing, I guess, but it's that's not really even true anymore, because one of my sons was a lacrosse player, so he's dealing with the sort of wealthier kids, and other ones is a football player and a baseball player, and that's like definitely the other economic end of the spectrum. And everyone, it's more practices, more games. You're away on Sunday. You're further away from your kids. Like it's there's more being asked of children, more being asked of parents, and you're traveling further and further and further. It's a somewhat innocuous example, but I also have seen marriages fall apart because of travel sports, and I've
Right.
seen kids have nervous breakdowns. So I think Rosa's diagnosis of acceleration, it doesn't just apply to cell phones and
No.
social media. It applies to sort of all things, and the shelf life of something, even the shelf life of a book, it's much shorter than it used to be.
Mm.
Everything is um, you combine that with the attention economy and the way that what is rewarded with clicks and attention, and you get a recipe for a lot of uh, um, criticism, judgment, anger, resentment,
Mhm.
sadness, exhaustion, and alienation. And it's very sad to me. So I think Rosa, I discovered Rosa, like a lot of people, through Andy Root. I think he's one of these people. I've tried to bring him into the big relief. He's one of these thinkers like Charles Taylor, who kind of needs to be translated a little bit.
Yep.
Like, so, but his idea of, a world of acceleration is also a world that holds out the possibility of mastery. We're trying to master things all the time.
Mhm.
And, but in fact, the deeper, what we need is not necessarily just slow down, but we need resonance, which is to sort of take things as they are, accept that there's, these moments where we're confronted with the fact that there is goodness and truth and God, and those things exist outside of our ability to manufacture or even respond. And those are the moments that we're chasing after. And I hope that the big relief tries to convey a little bit of some of Rosa's thoughts as well as my own, because moments of resonance are usually moments of grace rather than they're certainly not moments of increased acceleration.
No. And that's resonance. It's this weird concept because, as Rosa talks about it, and even Andy in his books, like, it's not something we manufacture, but it's something we can anticipate, but never expect. Like, it's this weird tension that, like, we can put ourselves in positions for resonance where it's we encounter the other, whether it's creation, whether it's other people, or whether it's spirituality, Jesus, God, and they surprise us, but there's nothing we can do to manufacture resonance. We're surprised by it. And I think sometimes grace shows up that way, where we can't manufacture grace per se, but when it shows up, it can surprise and overwhelm us.
I like that use of the word surprise. That's one of the definitions I tried to throw out in the book. Is grace is usually like a positive, surprising interruption.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if we could master or be in control of resonance, it wouldn't be resonance. Like,
No.
it would lose its power to heal and to restore. But the same thing is true with grace. I think that it's sort of, but there's the and yet. Many of us have these experiences of grace. The experience of falling in love is an experience of grace that you play a part in, but you do not dictate. You fall. And you meet someone. That's why it's always fun to ask people how they met, because there's always some story that doesn't involve their agency.
Right.
I mean, maybe there are some, but those are really boring stories that are sort of like, well, I had a 5-point plan, and she had a 5-point plan, and it all worked out exactly as it's supposed to. Like, I imagine there's some form of those stories that exist, but they're very few and far between. Most of them are happy accidents and the best things in our life. And like having a child too, you don't know who this child's going to be. You don't know what they're going to be like. But you'll experience grace.
No, and the surprise of grace, and you also talk about, and I've heard you talk about it on other podcasts, of, the person-to-person relationality of grace, and I was listening to a podcast you did with Dan Koch, and, you talk about Carl Rogers, the famous psychologist, and this unconditional positive regard. And then you mentioned your therapist's definition, which I can't remember.
Dorothy Martin, she referred to grace as non-contingent, indiscriminate alliance with the essential personhood of the other.
Can you
So
unpack, like, those are some big, big words, or like, can you unpack that, or like how does that, what does that mean, or what does that look like?
I think she's saying that it's a positive regard that is not contingent upon the one being regarded,
Hmm.
um, living up to some standard or being even captivating. There's something about you. What matters in this situation is not how I see myself or even the attributes that I bring to the table. It's how the other person sees me. And usually, when you hear people talk about what they love about the other person, it's oftentimes not the same thing as that person likes or loves about themselves. In fact, it may have to be some of these strange things that they find quite frustrating about themselves,
Hmm.
and or but love and like sort of lasting bonds of love, when you say the non-contingent thing, uh those bonds are usually solidified in moments of weakness and failure and shortcoming and loss, grief, and so when there's a reason to be rejected and the person sticks around, and it has to do with the person who's sticking around rather than the one who is maybe acting out in some way. Um, that's grace, and that has a potency to it in relationships, that you just see what happens. Just look at what people are like when they fall in love or when they
Mhm.
feel loved in that way. When a child feels loved in that way, securely attached is the other
Yeah.
sort of way that psychologists talk about it. It's not magic. It's not like a formula, because then
Hmm.
again, it wouldn't be grace if
Right.
it was somehow mechanized. But nonetheless, I think that we in those moments we know that we're close to the heartbeat of things.
Hmm.
We know that there's something of the divine that we're very near to, whether we can articulate it or not.
No, for sure. And I think those moments where somebody shows us grace can be the avenue through which the door of the divine grace, of Jesus's grace, can be open to us.
Mm.
And as you were talking, I remember, when Claire, my wife, and I were dating, I shared with her some struggles, and, she just held me and, you know, showed grace, and loved me despite my sin and my failures. And then I was later in therapy, and my therapist was like, "Hey, she opened the door to grace. Now walk through it. Like, that is the moment of grace, of you, being loved. And so now, like, can you be loved by Jesus?"
Mm.
And it was a powerful moment that it's obviously etched in my brain. This is 16 years ago. And I remember both instances that happened, very clearly.
That's
Uh,
beautiful. This is what I mean. I think why we crave romantic relationships at some levels. We want to be known and loved, and another word for that is to you know is grace. So, because when we talk about being known and loved, it's not that we want someone necessarily to. We want them to see all of us, not just the good things.
right.
We never meaning like I don't want them just to see the bad things, but it includes the whole person, which includes the blind spots and the struggle and the sin and the places of darkness and wound. Uh, I think it's what I need more of in my life. It's what other people need more of, and I think that this gives us a picture of who God is. So when we talk about God being gracious, we talk about Jesus being one who's full of grace and truth. Like, this is language. I have to start from the bottom up to get there, and that's part of how this book certainly tries to build out these experiences of deep. There's an affective element that I really tried to highlight in this book while keeping it, aimed at people's minds a little bit. But I think that if you stray too far from the heart, you're straying from grace. So it can't be intellectualized or abstracted into words too much.
No, and that's the tension we all live with this grace, is we want to understand it, or at least for me, I'm a more academic. I live in the mind. I love, reading. Not many people like to just pick up Hartmut Rosa and read him for fun, but like,
Yeah.
but so it's like that tension I feel in myself of like, okay, I've experienced God's grace, and yet it's never a one and done deal. Like, I need a constant experience of it. I need resonance to, those moments of inbreaking.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge I think we all face in the spiritual life of like, okay, I've experienced God's grace, and yet there will be moments because of the world, because of our sin habits, or, distorted habits, where we're pulled away from grace. And so how do we get pulled back into this heart?
Well,
That's,
in the book, I try to highlight various different aspects of it. So I think that there are times when, if you're a prisoner and you've done something terribly wrong, and there's going to be some sort of absolution is going to be a form of grace that you're very keenly interested in. But if you're someone who's simply racked up a lot of debt, well, then kind of forgiveness is going to be something that's going to be very interesting to you.
mm-hmm.
If you're someone who feels terrible about themselves, then a sort of a form of imputation might speak to you more clearly. But if you're dying, if you're physically ailing, then actual sort of salvation and rescue is going to be something, an avenue for grace into your life. For me, I mean, probably the more humdrum thing is like, I'm just a contemporary American on this treadmill of acceleration, and so the invitation that I can to play rather than produce, or to rest rather than to speed up. These are day by day, hour by hour dynamics in a person's life. It's not always these once was lost but now I'm found moments, although those are real. I wanted to have the book be able to include all a various menu, shall we say, of how grace might play out in a person's life.
Yeah. No, and your chapters on rest and play were, I found the most, to for lack of a better word, most resonant for me. Of just, okay, what, because you mentioned, I think in the play chapter, like, what would you do if you could do something just for the sheer joy of it, without any production required, or, which is such a interesting question that I don't think many of us would associate with grace, per se, maybe, or, and so I found that just a fascinating question of like, what would I do if I could just do it for the sheer joy of it?
Yeah, in that chapter, I'm trying to talk about grace in terms of the distinction between the law and grace. The law being like, I have to do something in order to get something else. There's always if and if then. If I am a good boy, then I'll get my dessert. Or if I, work out hard enough, then I will get strong. Like, what if the if then? What if the conditionality was removed? What if all there was sort of delight and gift, and you could do something not because it was going to bring you another end, but the reality of grace would be that everything that has been done, needs to be done, has been done. Therefore, what remains is the delight in God's creation, or however that manifests in your own life. Of course, that's a very scary place for some of us too, because it's not always that cut and dry, and our passions change, and we second guess ourselves. But the freedom, I think grace is the word that should be associated with freedom, and that's what that play is usually what love looks like in the key of freedom.
Yeah. And that's why, as a dad, I sometimes have such a hard time engaging my girls with play. Like, it can be a challenge to get into that mode because the burdens, the anxiety, the stress of life, and so when they just want to play, there's that internal struggle I have, and I'm sure most parents have felt it. But if I can let go, or just, there was a couple summers ago, where we would just do dance parties in the evening, or just be like, and they were fun moments, and I could let down. And so when you can engage in play, especially with a kid, I think you begin to see that grace show up.
It's one of the great things about kids, right?
Yeah.
They're present tense. I mean, that's why I bring Jesus's interactions with kids into those chapters. But I think we're in very similar stages of life, but like midlife, 40s, for most people, that's the apex of striving and having to prove and to provide, and their bills need to be paid, and you want to keep those kids safe, and you want to give them opportunities, and that's a moment where you're just the law is everything.
Hmm.
You know what you need to do. You just can't do it, or you have to do it, or and that's to be in touch with children. I think sometimes the fact that we get to raise children in that moment can be a gift from God. It can be an extra burden.
Yeah.
If we think that we're totally in control of everything about this child, which a lot of parents today, I think, have been led to believe that not only are they here to steward or love their child, but to control their child and the world that has their child experiences it, which is a deeply anxiety-producing endeavor.
Yeah.
But if you have some kind of sense that God is real and God cares, then maybe there's a way to enjoy the playfulness and the present tenseness that kids draw you out of, because you come in at the end of your day, you're thinking about all the stuff you didn't do that you need to do the next day, and all of a sudden you're hit with a dance party, and that's life. Like they're living.
Yeah.
You're living in the future or the past.
Right.
They're living in the present, which is what resonance always does for you, right? It
Yeah.
always brings you to right there. But I've been in that moment. It's like, oh, I just can't talk about this right now. You just can't do this right now. You guys want to play horse? And then 5 minutes later, I'm like, shoot, that's where I should be.
Yeah. No, and not only demands of work, but then you have bodies that begin to betray us, whether it's knee surgery, or I found out yesterday I have to have a root canal. Or houses start breaking down and you need to do repairs. And if life is, I found that, when appliances break down, cars break down, and health breaks down, and it's all at once, and then all of a sudden you feel just under the weight of life.
Yeah. The decay, the entropy,
Yeah.
to which so much of I'm in that. I'm just you're speaking my language. You mentioned knee surgery. I've just had knee surgery.
Right.
I've also the knee surgery happened on the exact same month when I was told I needed readers to read books and to read screens, and I just feel like, okay, I guess I'm on the downward slope here.
Yeah.
So.
And in this moment, though, like those are the moments where grace can show up, if we're open to it. Like, again, you and I, big fans of Andy, and Andy would say that, in those moments of desolation, the other person, whether it's a physical person or Jesus, can show up and meet us in that ministry of consolation. But that's such a hard moment.
Yeah, you wish consolation didn't often involve desolation, but his new definition of evangelism, of being sort of following Jesus into sorrow with words of consolation, I find that to be very convicting, because it is grace, because there's no reason to presume that when you're in a desolate place that there was any reason. The whole experience of being in a desolate place is the experience that there is no consolation, and so it has to come from the outside. It has to come from outside of you,
right?
And that's often where we encounter God. I think that's the pattern, certainly, that I see in most of my most spiritually sophisticated or wise or enlightened friends. And to the extent that I've experienced God, it usually is the point of need rather than blessing. And grace is what greater consolation is there than the grace of God that says, you can't, but God can, or you aren't, but God is. I mean, all of these console. People get worried that I've reducing Christianity to nothing but consolation, but I always want to say, like, well, it's certainly not less than that, because for most people that's a way to basically take away any consolation, is to bring in all these other aspects of the faith, and before long you have a faith that just feels like a huge burden or a weapon or something that you personally have no connection to anymore. But the consolation is again, we're right at the heartbeat of not only life, but God.
Yeah. And this podcast also focuses on food and the table, and obviously I believe table, food, hospitality is a key arena and key conduit of grace. And so, like, how do you see food, in the table and hospitality, food in its totality, right? Like, it's a big idea, but like, how can this idea of the table bring us into a realm of God's grace that maybe other activities can't.
Well, sometimes I think about the fact that, I was just reading the Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and it's about an astronaut who's in space, and that you're having to eat these like tubes of paste and stuff like that. And I'm always a big sci-fi person, or eating freeze-dried meals that are disgusting. And
Yeah.
What feels more like love than to be someone to cook a meal for you and to serve it for you, that it doesn't taste like sludge or just nutrients to keep you alive, but there's taste, there's artistry, there's thinking, and there's care, and there's all this stuff that doesn't have to be,
Mm-hmm.
And I find that to be a way, in an avenue into grace, to say nothing of the fact that eating with people is just, if you want to get to know someone, have a meal with them. And certainly that was the case for Jesus. But I've always been a foodie. I like food. When it comes to pleasure centers, that's mine. Like, I have to be careful about not eating too much all the time. I just really like food, and I think that the abundance of it, the abundance of taste, the abundance of love that can be expressed through it is a huge. Just, I like the physical element of it too. I'm an Episcopalian. I have friends that are very Anglo-Catholic, and the way they talk about the sacraments can sometimes be very. They always talk about enfleshment and Eucharistic body and blood sort of stuff, and sometimes that language leaves me cold. But then I think about how food can be such an agent of grace for me to taste something, not just to be nourished, but to sit down with someone and experience something together. I mean, what's more fun? I saw something. Maybe you get a kick out of this. Some Twitter guy was saying, basically every man in the primary, what's this? The primary criteria for a friend in your 40s for a man is someone that you can send pictures of sandwiches to.
Yeah.
I mean, or pizza. I have like 3 or 4 people in my life who send me pictures of like tacos or pizza or sandwiches or meals.
Yep.
And that's a connect, but that's a deep connection for us. That's a joy thing. So I'm just riffing. Food can become all sorts of guilt and condemnation, and the way that people feel about their bodies is an area that's very, very radioactive for some folks. But for me, I find it to be a wonderful source of God's, creativity and joy.
No, it is, right. Yeah. And, getting in the right side of what you should eat or could eat, and, eating the right things or the right diets, or don't do this, or getting rid of, like, there's a lot of guilt associated with food, and our diet culture, and then, there are dark side, eating disorders, and people do have distorted and damaged relationships with food that I think we do need to be aware of. But that joy of food, and you remember those instances where you shared an amazing sandwich, an amazing meal with friends, like, and it's better when people are with you to share that joy.
It's communal. I mean, so many of the things that we are told to do to make ourselves a better person these days are solitary activities.
Right.
And the things we tally: take more steps, read more books, whatever it may be, to sleep longer hours.
Yeah.
Here you have something that triples in joy the more you can do it with other people.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking just this morning, Andrew, my wife, I was coming from PT, from physical therapy, and she showed up and she had breakfast tacos for me. And that was such an act of love. I didn't expect it. Talk about grace as a surprise.
Yeah.
She's just like, surprise, here you go. And that set the tone for the rest of the day. And I felt deeply known and loved through food.
Right. No, and there's been moments, and I've shared it on this podcast, of my best friend Ty and I, we went to the Donut Man in Glendora, California. He's, I think, pretty famous countrywide because he does these peach and strawberry donuts in California during the summer season. And
Oh
so
my gosh.
we got a peach donut, and it's basically a glazed donut cut in half filled with fresh California peaches, right? Like, and we took a bite and we looked at each other and we laughed and we cried. Like, it was a moment of pure resonance that, like, nothing we did could, it was just this moment where you're like, I don't know what I'm experiencing, but it is pure joy.
You're killing me. That sounds unbelievable. Someone asked me what Grace tastes like, and I said, I think Grace tastes like a South Carolina peach perfectly in season, because that to me is so super abundant.
Yeah.
And incongruous to the ground, the dirty ground from which it springs and stuff like that. It's like, this is what came out of that tree. This is so good.
Right.
To imagine that with a donut, though.
Yes.
I'm with you, man. That sounds incredible.
Yeah. Oh. So yeah, it's on Route 66, Glendora, California. Just a little walk-up shop. But they make these donuts that are just otherworldly, and I've been back since, and it's not the same.
Huh. It was that moment, something about that day where he was on that day, right? Like,
yeah. They're still great, but like, you want to relive that moment, and it's not there. But like that memory of just laughter and pure joy, being like a little schoolgirl, like just giddy, like. It's just one of those moments of grace that you're just like, what? It surprised us. I can't do anything about it. And yet here I am eating it.
I love that. I think one of the things I was asked to write a piece about, like, what's, are there any things you're optimistic about in the future, And I was, it's, if you see the worn out, graceless world in which we live, in which everyone's yelling at each other and people seem to be just deeply miserable. One of the things that occurred to me, and I don't think it's a small thing, I think food has just gotten better. Like, I think that if you're lived in the 1940s, and not even wartime, but just like the really good food, and then you compare that to what you get today, and I think about myself, like the pizza in our town, what it was 15 years ago versus now, and there's some Italian guy who's opened up this amazing shop, and a Detroit person who's opened up this incredible shop, and the food's literally 3 times better than it used to be, like, categorically. The produce has probably always been pretty great, and yet it still feels like there's been food it gives me a reason for hope.
Huh. No, yeah, because I think then we experience more international cuisine. We have access to, my wife and I, we live in Flagstaff. It's a smaller town, but we have Thai restaurants, Korean restaurants, great Mexican food, and that's a grace, right? Like, of being able to get different foods that we don't have to travel the world anymore looking for.
Yes, Indian food. Ooh.
Huh.
We have great sushi here too, though. But towards Central Virginia, we're landlocked. We shouldn't have good sushi, but we do.
Yeah. No. People always like are weary of landlocked sushi, and I'm like, with air travel and getting fresh food around the world now, like, you can the fish is fresh and good. Like, don't overthink this. Like, enjoy it. Like,
yeah.
Choose wisely, but don't overthink it.
Yeah, we in our Mockingbird, my organization, one of the things that always stood out is when we do these conferences, and we're not able to do them quite in the same way, but we always wanted to have food together, and we always wanted to have good food together.
Yeah.
And when I remember talking to a guy at a church who wasn't a very well-heeled church or anything, but he said, it's important to me that our coffee hour is not quote unquote church coffee with freeze-dried Otis Spunkmeyer muffins or something like that. Like, this we can't do much, but we can make sure that at least you get some fresh donuts or fresh and decent coffee, and actually putting money towards that is not putting money towards pleasure, it's putting money towards love. And that was in service, and that involved a shift from the older the older guard's mentality, which was like,
Right.
this is like something, well, we're kind of obliged to. You do it but we don't want to get too fancy. We don't want to be indulgent or sinful. So he was like, we're actually not anywhere in the realm of like sinful indulgence with our coffee hour.
No.
we could make this people feel valued, and we could do that by giving them pastries that were not cooked last week.
Yeah. They're not the grocery store, discards.
Yes. Yeah, those are eye-opening moment for me, and I think we've taken it to heart at our church. We just did this vast, we do a lot of sort of social ministries in our church, and we have a lot of outreach stuff, but we've also been like, it's time for us to get better coffee, so let's do what we need to do that.
Right. Yeah. Because I think, if we establish that the Eucharist is the model for which Jesus calls us into, the Eucharist isn't bland or bad tasting. It should be this invitation to more, to a life that we want to see come, and so yet, like, we settle for, I think, second-rate tables because we don't know what it means to be, I think, at times be nourished at Jesus's table.
Yeah, and I mean, isn't the vision of heaven we have of a feast? I mean, that's I don't think that's arbitrary at all.
No.
I love that. I mean, I'm not just, yes, I love Babette's feast as much as anyone, but I think the heavenly banquet that I look forward to is a I really am excited about the food.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yes.
That's my brother just went on a sabbatical, and he's a sober person, so he wasn't going to places to go drink or to indulge. He went to Asia because he wanted to eat. And,
yeah.
That was his spiritual sort of thing. So, and I want to just say one other thing about the book, because I do try to phrase grace in terms of relief, the experience of pressure being removed, and I do feel like it's not only a relief to bite into something that's tastier than it has to be, but it also, when you're a person who's been carrying a lot and the weight of the world, as it were, part of coming back to oneself does involve the grace that I would be looking for, does involve some sort of sustenance, some kind of food, some kind of that. To me, it is part of relief. It's not just sleep. We say, take your weight off, get a shower and take a rest, but we're also like have a delicious meal. And so I think grace, relief, food, it's all intertwined in a way that doesn't even necessarily have to be separated out too much. But I love that. I think it's such a no-brainer that your podcast would always, that you'd be combining the two in such explicit ways. That's why I'm so excited to come on.
No, I appreciate that. And then you factor in hospitality, and I always come back to Nouwen's definition of like hospitality from reaching out. It's a book our small group is reading right now this summer, and I think it's a book all about grace in terms, but he talks about hospitality as, creating a space for another person to flourish, to become the person they were meant to be, and that we're not manipulating them. We're not here for an agenda, but how do I welcome a person to the table so that they can, to use your words, like experience relief, and just exhale.
Yes. That's what I think that there's so much, when I've heard grace described as a cosmic exhale, as a cool drink of water, to a parched throat. And that's what I tried to, that's what I hope when the best reviews I've received of this book so far, is that it feels like an exhale. It feels like being doused in cold water. It feels like relief. And I think that means that a person has had an affective experience of the text as much as a intellectual one.
Mm-hmm. Or it's a sip of a really great wine. I'm a wine. I sell wine now as my job, and so I've tasted some really great wines. And to share a bottle and to have other people taste a bottle and be like, I've not tasted a wine like this in years, or, to see them get goosebumps, like people who've worked in the wine industry for years, decades, and to have, for them to try a new wine and to have a visceral reaction to it. It's like wine is grace.
That's incredible. Yeah, I think of Ratatouille, like how it can just totally, that's what you're chasing after, these moments of resonance where you're confronted with the fact that there's goodness and beauty that you're not responsible for.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes in the most simple ways. Like Ratatouille is a peasant food, and so it's not white truffle risotto, but it was, grace was experienced by the critic in peasant food, in a dish that harkened back to his mom and his home.
Probably the freedom of play in some kind of, inarticulate way.
No, for sure. I think food, there's so much, as I continue to unpack, of like, okay, what can the table be, and what can food be, whether, it's growing, the grace of growing vegetables and tasting, a vine ripened tomato, or really good carrots.
One of my theological heroes, and who I quote in here, I'm sure you're a fan, but is Robert Capon, who was a food critic for the Times, and we had to get to Mockingbird got to publish some of his stuff that had gone out of print, and he's just so in favor of lots of butter, extra butter, lots of the fattiest meat, the rich, not holding back. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the man who in my view understood grace on a kind of a molecular level and was as playful a writer as they come in any genre, was also a food critic. I just think that's, and critic, I would say critic is, what he was criticizing was usually parsimonious and cheap, or by that I mean like stern-faced attitudes towards food. He was a defender of the good, the rich, the succulent, and a critic of the unnecessarily paucity. That's what I love about Capon. But it was all of a piece with him, and that's very, very telling.
Yeah. No, Capon. Yeah, some of his writings are just so, or all of his writings, but yeah, I've read a couple of his books, and they're books I probably need to revisit. But yeah, just there's joy, there's depth, there's the playfulness, like you say, that comes throughout his writings.
So much.
Yeah. So as we begin to wrap up, it's a question I ask all of my guests. What's the story you want the church to tell?
That God is not mad at you. I really want people to know that they can bring their cares, actual cares and concerns to God, and that there is a destination for your guilt and sadness and grief and fear. And I think that today we're constantly scanning around for a destination. Where do we deposit these things? And the foot of the cross is the best depository I know of. But I want people to know that God is not mad at them.
Yeah.
But that's a kind of a pithy way to say that God is gracious. That the voice of God's grace echoes much louder than the voice of God's law, and and not only that, I also want people to know that God is real.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
Andy's very good at saying that God, there is a living God who has power, and we are not responsible for transforming ourselves or other people, but we do know someone who can, and that's a deep relief to those who feel like there's nothing good available outside of the things that I can engineer myself. So all of those things.
Yeah.
But
yeah. No, I appreciate it. And then some fun questions as we close up. What's one food you refuse to eat?
I really don't like porcini mushrooms.
Okay.
I don't like the texture. It's not a taste thing. It's a texture thing. I just don't can't do it. Blue cheese, I feel the same kind of way about. Those drives my wife crazy, but those are the two things that I really shy away from. If I find out they're in the dish, I just sort of don't eat it.
That's fair. Okay. But yeah, blue cheese and mushrooms on steak, it's like there's something unctuous and delicious about
I
it.
know, I'm missing out. I'm clearly missing out. The Lord's going to have to change my taste buds on
Yeah.
those ones.
Do you do other mushrooms? Like, if it's like a wild mushroom, like the wild mushrooms, like morels, chanterelles.
I think if I had a guide, someone, I watched
Okay.
that Nicolas Cage movie called Pig about his truffle sniffing pig.
Yeah.
And it got me very interested in the whole world of these truffles that people pay thousands of dollars for.
Yeah.
So if I had a guy, it's like reading Dostoevsky or something, or reading Hartmut Rosa. If I
Yeah.
had the right guide, I would raise my hand.
Okay.
Cheap mushrooms, I think that I'm just not that interested. It's more the texture, but
I
I
hear
would be
you.
absolutely up to try the good stuff.
Okay. That's fair. And then finally, on the other end of the spectrum, what's one of the best things you've ever eaten?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm gonna betray my there's a restaurant in I've always been a huge a fan of Indian food,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a restaurant in Washington D.C. called the Bombay Club, which I'm sure is slightly Americanized Indian food, but it's also high end stuff. And they have a tandoori kale. I didn't,
Oh,
kale
yeah.
is not the sort of thing I look for on a menu, but they have a tandoori kale that they drizzle this sort of yogurt thing and these spices that, you've never tasted before. And it was a revelation that I still think about. If you want to get closer to where, what's actually attainable, because I get to go there occasionally on like an anniversary dinner.
Yeah.
I lived in New Haven, Connecticut for a long time, and there's a pizza place there called Modern Pizza.
Okay.
And there is a sausage and cherry pepper pizza that you can get that is, in my mind, the platonic ideal of what a pizza should be. And
Nice.
it has. Usually when I go back, it doesn't let me down.
Awesome. And then finally, there's a conversation among chefs about last meals, as in if you knew you had one last meal to enjoy, what would be on your table? And so if Dave had one last meal, what might be on his table?
I watched someone do this recently, and they basically had like an 8-course meal. So I'm not gonna. I think that was cheating. Like, you can't have absolutely everything. I would have I would have probably a pepperoni pizza from Modern Pizza.
Yeah.
With a side of the most soup dumplings from New York City, like pork soup dumplings,
Yeah.
like really the Szechuan stuff. To drink, I'm not really a drinker, so I would, as lame as it sounds, it would probably be some form of iced tea or like the extremely good lemonade I've had every once in a while in my life. And for dessert, one of those like bread puddings that almost they're almost so, it's almost so rich that it puts you to sleep, because I want to be in a deep food coma when I got the lethal injection.
No, for sure. We didn't say you were, there was going to be lethal injection afterwards. You took that to a dark way.
Why do you think that?
You're the first one that, went that dark real quick.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, I think a last meal is like, you get one last meal in jail.
No, I understand. No, it is. That's generally. Well, Dave, I appreciated this conversation. I appreciate your work. If people want to learn more about your work, follow you, where do they find you?
Sure. Well, thank you, Andrew. It's been a joy. Mockingbird is where I'm at most of the time, where I can be found. mbird.com, mbird.com. The Mockingcast is my principal podcast. There's also one with my brother. And my book, The Big Relief, is available wherever books are sold. Just ask if people do like it. Contemporary authors. We need Amazon ratings and Goodreads reviews and all those things. If you felt so led, that'd be awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with others. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Biggest Table, where we explore what it means to be transformed by God's love around the table and through food. Until next time, bye.